This week, we dive into the illustrated symbols of Freemasonry. Do they represent elements of the consciousness? Then, we'll read a poem that allows us to reflect on our own mortality. Are we building that house, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens? Finally, we'll wrap it up with a piece that aims to shed some light on a Miss Harriet Martineau in her retrospect of the Western travels, when she relates a tale of a pirate who was also a brother. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back. This is episode number 471. Right away, we want to go ahead and thank our contributors, our fellows, and our producers of the Whence podcast. The Whence podcast has been around since 2011, believe it or not, bringing you weekly Masonic education 50 weeks a year. We could not do that without the contributors, the fellows, and the producers. I want to thank you very much, and I also want to invite you, if interested, to check out the WCYpodcast.com website, click on Support the Show, and see if it's something you might be interested in doing. We have 3 tiers available. You'll get your name on the website. If you're a contributor, a fellow gets a name on the website as well as a thank you card personally written by myself, and the producer gets those plus the producer's pin. You can help out on Patreon, or you can help out through PayPal. We have subscription models on both. And if none of that sounds great to you, then you can certainly check out a one-time donation gift if you're interested. I want to thank you in advance for considering it. And again, thank you to our existing contributors, fellows, and producers. In the news this week, I guess it's all news now. Everything is shifted in the profane world of news. So nothing crazy going on there. Hopefully, maybe we have a COVID vaccine. I heard this. Maybe we'll be getting back to Masonry the way we know it sooner than we thought. Fingers crossed. I know it's a long shot, but I'm hoping. If you're listening to this on Sunday, the 15th, then know that tomorrow, on the 16th, I'll be presenting for Triangle Lodge via Zoom, and you can get all the event details by heading over to our website, WCYpodcast.com, click on Presentation Schedule, and you'll see it right there, 11/16, Triangle Lodge presents Esoterics 101, and then you'll just click the little plus to get the Zoom details. And we've got a couple more talks. I do need to update the schedule. So just know that there are some additional talks happening via Zoom that'll be happening in the next few weeks. So let's go ahead and dive right into the first piece. It's called Illustrated by Symbols. Now, it came from the Dormer Masonic Study Circle, number 157, and we've read things from the Dormer Masonic Study Circle before. So I want to make sure that we give them credit where credit is due. Illustrated by Symbols. Of course, the morality of Freemasonry must be illustrated by symbols, for there is nothing else. Many papers, not just recent ones, have pointed out that everything we do, everything we use is a symbol. A symbol is something we are familiar with, which, in addition to its conventional meaning, has a specific connotation beyond the obvious one. It is not necessary to elaborate on the distinction and difference between a sign and a symbol. No one has ever yet invented a symbol. A sign, yes, but symbol, no. Symbols originate in the subconscious. Every word is a sort of shorthand to express a concept or define an object. Words mean more or less the same to each of us, but only more or less. Even the letters making up the words have a deliberate meaning, form, and a peculiar relationship to each other. Masonic symbols are generally architectural. They are borrowed from architecture, which has been defined as living mathematics. They are applied to the science of soul measurement and soul development, to self-knowledge, that most rewarding of all human studies. But why should the square teach morality? What was the process of logic? Or was it a revelation? whereby this tool became associated with the concept. We should not forget that the square was used thus as a symbol in China over 6,000 years ago. In the definition of morality, is there not an element of both equality and uprightness? If therefore there is a degree of arbitrariness in allocating morality to the square, or the square to morality, how much does this matter? What is important is that we try to fully understand morality. Could you define morality? And of course, distinguish it from morality? When we can do so, we no longer need a symbol for it at all, and so could discard the square. Put it another way, how may a glass of wine be interpreted as a symbol? To one, it could represent drunkenness, to another, abstention and teetotalism, while to a third it would suggest the mellowness of moderation. So the meaning may very well depend on the environment or context. It is probably true to say that a symbol can never be precisely defined or fully explained. Symbols are stimulating seed thoughts. The cross in Western religion expresses a multitude of ideas, emotions, and aspects. But a cross after a name on a list can simply mean that the individual is dead or has not paid his subscription. The graffiti of a 12-year-old boy may have an explicit meaning, not present when an electrician speaks of male plugs and female sockets. And we should get very refined ideas from an educated Hindu on this significant and symbolic subject. The meaning and significance depend on the context. However, just as in Masonry the square always teaches morality, so is it that when we give the Masonic fire or salutation, point, left, right, point always refers to the deity. It does so in all degrees, not just the craft and royal arch. For in the deity is the comprehensive conjointing of all opposites, represented by left and right. There is a tradition that when the creation came into manifestation, the first thing to appear was a point. So the point, or yod, is a symbol of God manifest. But a brother was recently heard to say that he was looking for an authoritative interpretation of symbols. If we might regard Dr. Carl G. Jung as something of an authority on symbols, we may take note of some ideas which are expressed and fully elaborated in his last work entitled Man and His Symbols. It is well known that Jung regards dreams as a means used by the subconscious mind of a man to give sensible instruction to the conscious mind. Instruction here is used to include awaken, warn, arouse, subdue, remind, liberate, enlighten, provoke, restrain, enliven, direct. The subconscious mind just has to get through to the conscious mind. Every aspect of a dream is of significance to the dreamer, who alone can interpret it. He may, of course, be helped by a so-called psychoanalyst or psychologist, but the dreamer alone can assess the validity of the interpretation. Jung also holds that the dream contains its own key to the understanding of the dream's message. The Talmud says, quote, "The dream is its own interpretation," end quote. In other words, no dream symbol can be separated from the dreamer. Curiously, this finds an exact parallel in modern scientific research, where it is becoming accepted, perhaps reluctantly by scientists, that the result of any research is not independent of the researcher. So, with dreams, the dreamer gets instruction which originates from within himself. In Freemasonry, a brother gets instruction by a deliberately constructed system of morality. One may be regarded as coming from within, the other from without, but both are indeed illustrated by symbols. Allegories are a way of stringing symbols together into coherence, into some sort of story. Dreams use the equivalent of mixed metaphors. They do not make sense, neither do allegories, if examined too literally and closely. Dreams are vivid and picturesque, so are allegories. It is the conscious mind, the so-called intellect, which needs concepts trimmed of their emotional and fantastic content. A paper such as this has to present ideas in a somewhat cold, intellectual manner. This may seem to be a rather one-sided concession to man's developing need, and it is possibly a result of the technological revolution over the last few hundred years, with its emphasis and insistence on intellectual appreciation, because it has been paralleled by a corresponding decrease in man's use of his other perceptive faculties. But there are a surprising number of individuals who never use their minds at all if they can avoid it, and an equal number who do use it but in an astonishingly naive way. Many wide-awake people live as if they never use their senses. They do not see the obvious before them, hear not the sounds around them, and notice not the things they touch. They are even unaware of their own bodies. Others, being completely devoid of imagination, live as if the state they had arrived at today were final, with no possibility of change, as if both their inner and outer worlds were static and permanently so. Truly thinking people apply their intellects to trying to adapt themselves to people and circumstances, and there are equally intelligent people who make their way by feeling. Sensation, examples being sense perception, which may be equated with the Tyler, tells us something exists. The impressions having been rationalized by the inner guard, thinking and feeling. As just described above, the junior warden tells us what it is and whether it is agreeable. Intuition, the senior warden, tells us whence it came and whither it shall go. Conscience, the worshipful master, relates it to all other things. Examples being to the unity of all things. Note the derivation of the word conscience. These functions of our being are represented by these Masonic symbols. So the significance of a Masonic symbol is quite deliberate, but nevertheless is open to individual interpretation. Doubtless, the meanings attaching to the symbols in the mysteries of ancient Egypt were equally deliberate. In a way, the meanings remain the same, but the form of the meaning is clothed with changes. We can quite easily imagine an Egyptian neophyte asking, where did this Osiris-Isis myth come from? Was Osiris a real person? And hearing an old Egyptian past master on being prodded into wakefulness reply, we always did it the other way in my day. We never asked questions. These questions need answers. Do we not say Masonry requires a perfect freedom of inclination in every candidate? What a symbol means is not independent of the individual. Our Masonic symbols are almost too well defined. If they always meant exactly the same thing, a symbol would become a mere word, and the word, a collection of meaningless letters. Is it not written, "The letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life"? So, brethren, let us remember that Freemasonry is a means to an end which is far more important than the means. And likewise with its symbols, they too are unimportant compared with what the symbol means to you. For a man in his present state can never really understand or comprehend anything. At the bottom of this paper appears a quote by Reverend J.O. Skinner. The aims of Freemasonry are not limited to one form of operation or one mode of benevolence. Its object is at once moral and social. It proposes both to cultivate the mind and enlarge and purify the heart. Well, there you have this interesting piece illustrated by symbols coming from Dormer Masonic Study Circle, number 157, and I can't help but relate this to McNulty's work, the late McNulty. He just passed away, just incredibly sad. However, his book, one of his books, he relates the officers of a lodge to elements of the human consciousness. So it seems as though certain Masonic authors of the past have really touched on this idea. Of course, Albert Pike did so in his descriptions of the Tyrians, and so much more. And then we see it here in this paper, and then McNulty, and I think a plethora of other authors have also made these interesting correlations. So this was a fascinating piece, and I think it helps us understand a little bit. Maybe next time you're within a lodge and it's opening, sit back and really pay attention and say, well, if the lodge is opening, and the master is my conscience, and this is this, and this is this. Is this how my mind is interacting with itself? I think you'll find some interesting parallels. Alright, next is, I'm going to give you fair warning. This next one is a short poem, and it is not a happy one. What I'm trying to say is, you might feel weird. But here we go. I am ready for my last degree. An old man lay sick in the Masonic State Home, his face white as the white sea foam. His eyes were dim, his hair was gray, his back was bent with the toils of the way. He unflatteringly spoke, and I heard him say, I'm ready for my last degree. I've come to the end of that level of time that leads us all on to that grand lodge sublime, from whose sacred form none ever returns. More light in masonry there I shall learn. By an altar where light evermore burns, I'm ready for my last degree. With the apprentice's gauge I divided my time, and this I have found amidst life's great turmoil. Time for work, for worship and rest from my toil. My wages are due in corn, wine, and oil. I'm ready for my last degree. Each day from life's quarries I've hewn out a stone. With a gavel I've shaped them each one alone, and shipped them alone beyond that bright strand to build me a house in that bright better land. A spiritual house not made by hands. I'm ready for my last degree. I've squared each stone by the virtue square, and plumbed them all true as I shipped them there. With the compass I've measured the master's designs, and kept in the due bounds with his points and his lines. My blueprints are folded, I've answered his signs. I'm ready for my last degree. A few moments later, the old man was dead, and I fancy I could see his soul as it fled, upward and onward to that great door where he gave his alarm, and a voice did implore. The old man made answer with these words once more, I'm ready for my last degree. That night in a lodge, free from strife and from storm, he took his last degree, his last in due form. So may I live as to build, day by day, a spiritual house in that land far away. So when I meet my Grand Master, I can say, I'm ready for my last degree. All right, now you might be thinking, where did that come from? What's the context? That one came straight from MasonicWorld.com. I'll put a link back to that website, to this particular piece. There's no other information on it, but the way it was written was kind of Edgar Allan Poe. I felt a little bit of The Raven in there, the way the lines come together, but truly a good piece on reflection, because this is the entire aim of Freemasonry, is to remember that at some point we do lay down our working tools, and when we least expect it, anything that assists us in contemplating mortality, our own mortality, is worth it. I know it makes people feel uncomfortable, but we really have to understand that that's okay, because it's when you're uncomfortable is when we grow. Now, the last piece for this week is a really interesting one. It comes from Freemason's Monthly Magazine, which was published in 1842. It's called The Pirate Mason. And here we go. The always talented and sometimes eccentric Harriet Martineau, in her retrospect of Western travels, relates the following anecdote. Quote, Then came Captain L with his 5 fine daughters. He looked too old to be their father, and well he might. When master of a vessel, he was set ashore by pirates with his crew on a desert island where he was 36 days without food. Almost all his crew were dead, and he just dying when help arrived, by means of Freemasonry. Among the pirates was a Scotchman, a Mason. As was Captain L, the two exchanged signs. The Scotchman could not give aid at the moment, but after many days of fruitless and anxious attempts, he contrived to sail back, at the risk of his life, and landed on the desert island on the 36th day from his leaving it. He had no expectation of finding the party alive, but to take the chance and lose no time, he jumped ashore with a kettle full of wine in his hand. He poured wine down the throats of the few men, of the few whom he found still breathing, and treated them so judiciously that they recovered. At least it was called recovery, but Captain L's looks are very haggard and nervous still. He took the Scotchman home and cherished him to the day of his death." End quote. It will probably be recollected by a portion of our readers that while in this country we believe in the year 1856 Miss Martineau perhaps laboring under one of those fits of eccentricity which frequently led her into acts of indiscretion, sided with the enemies of our institution, and contributed of her talents and influence to bring it into disrepute and public contempt. It operated in her case, however, as did McFinnigal's gun, which, being charged for duck or plover, shot wide and kicked its owner over. Of the result of that exploit, we do not complain. That which excites our surprise is that she should have so far forgotten what is due to the character of an ingenious and honorable opponent, a character that we had a right to expect to find in a lady of her intelligence, as to give publicity to an incident, the truth of which she does not doubt, so beautifully exhibiting the practical utility of the order under its holier attributes, without the slightest reference to her previously expressed opinions. It afforded her an honorable opportunity to have acknowledged her error, and to have done tardy justice to an institution which, while writing the anecdote, she must have felt conscious she had wrongfully traduced, but her self-pride was permitted to triumph even to the prejudice of her character for integrity and truth. Comment, however, was not necessary. The mere recital of the incident furnished a full refutation of all she had previously written against the institution. She has given to her readers the evidence that the heart of the renegade, dead to all other associations but that of crime, can be reached and awakened to a sense of kindlier feelings of humanity by the irresistible appeals of Freemasonry. The pirate mason, at the risk of his own life, saves that of his brother. What a sweet spirit is here shown. The pirate no more, but warmed by the benevolent affections, pants to save. Even in such hands the wine is blessed by him whose ways are indeed mysterious. It ends with a quote by DeWitt Clinton. Masonry superadds to other obligations the strongest ties of connection between it and the cultivation of virtue, and furnishes the most powerful incentives to goodness. As we read this piece, it is really interesting because what are we even talking about, this Harriet Martineau? And it seems as though she has written some rather scathing remarks of the institution, as we are referring to it in this piece, in this article that appeared in Freemason Monthly magazine, perhaps in issues previous. She really had taken exception to our fraternity, and perhaps now, in her own way, has written a story about Freemasonry and what it has done for somebody. And the editors of the Freemasons Monthly magazine have said, well, isn't it nice that she decided to write something, whether she thought it appropriate or not, that it would refute her previous statements or not, but it has, because even among pirates, Freemasonry seems to save the day and uphold a value that supersedes all else. And I think that's also driven home by the quote at the end by DeWitt Clinton. I'll look and see if I can actually find what Miss Martineau had written about Freemasonry. It shouldn't be too hard. We'll see what we turn up in the coming weeks. That's it for this week. I hope you really enjoyed. Once more, I want to thank all of our producers, our fellows, our contributors for all of their assistance and their help with the program. Be sure to check out wcypodcast.com and check out the shop where you can pick up any number of products that we have amassed to help support this program. And there's also the Hello Hiram pin, which you can get. It's a limited run. We only made 50 of them. And you can only get it as an add-on for $2 to any order. We also have the Masonic Con Chicago limited gear. We have just a few items left of the items that we ran for the convention. You can get those right there in the shop. So once more, thank you so much for listening this week. We'll talk to you all next week. And until then, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.
WCY Media.